I think that kind of leads me into kind of the next topic, which is talking about funding and defunding of police departments. So, leading very much into that, what do you think about all of these calls to basically defund police departments and essentially then pull back in a lot of ways outside of the community and have maybe fewer resources or less police presence going forward? What do you think about where that might lead us, or if that's a good idea?
Well, I can tell you that I'm for it, just in a different way, and that's how I feel about it. And trying to elaborate on that, I think what people really want is to reappropriate those funds to other areas.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying that we've invested all this money into police departments, and this is what we're getting out of it. Our crime rates are not going down, and I like to have a caveat, because I do think that there's room to invest more, but I don't know if we're going to have the ability to do so. So maybe a different approach is going to be needed.
Okay.
It's one of those things where, yeah, you want more officers and you want the ability to keep these streets safe, but is that likely? I mean, we're dealing with a profession now that is the hated profession in the world, particularly in the U.S.
Right.
Nobody right now probably wants to be a police officer. I'm not even a police officer
Right.
still anymore. So there's that factor to deal with already.
Right.
And then you couple that with the fact that now people are calling for defunding, so that means no probably increases in salaries, benefits, or anything that's going to attract police officers.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we're going to get more police officers unless we have a significant change in public sentiment and how they view things.
Right.
So that's why I say I'm for it. I just for it in a smart manner. I don't want to see anybody's salaries get cut, and I don't want to see any layoffs.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to find different ways to reappropriate some of those funds in some of the areas that may not be needed. So it's kind of hard because, I don't know where all the funds go. I know you got to invest in, cars and, equipment and things of that nature. So, and then the training, of course, is another thing that's expensive. So it's so hard to, really point to an area and say, okay, well, we can take money from here and put it in this program, put it in that program.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we do need to seriously evaluate the budget and see if there's some area where we can gradually defund it, and then put it in areas that need, maybe something for the homeless or something for some of the mental health issues that we deal with, that police end up dealing with on a daily basis, because there is no one else to deal with it. And a lot of times the only way to deal with that is to try to get them to take their medication, sitting there talking with them for an extended period of time,
Right.
or the worst case scenario, jail, or sometimes the hospital as well, but sometimes even jail,
Right.
depending upon what's going on and what happened. So obviously there needs to be some investment there so we can ensure that people are getting the proper help that they need. And like I said, these budgets, they're so slim that, there's not a lot of wiggle room. There's so many things to fund. So it's really hard to point to an area. Maybe going back to 2 officers to a car is something that could help. But, there's trade-offs to that too, because now you have less cars. So that means that when you have not a lot of 911 calls, you might not see an officer for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be okay for some crimes,
Right.
but when you start getting to those violent crimes, active shooters and things of that nature, that's where you're going to pay the price there.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's a combination. Maybe you could have some that are reserved for more of that, and then some that, they double up and go to the other type calls. But it's not as simple as that sometimes, because depending upon how things work out, you may need those officers that are just by themselves to go to things that may not be as serious, but the fact that if a call volume is so high, they have to respond to those as well, and then you get left without units available. So it's so hard to point to a particular area where you need to change. But I will say that maybe some of the change could come in the leadership aspect and the funding there. I know a lot of those salaries can be pretty large.
They can it's always hard to get the people who decide the budgets to trim the budget from themselves, of course.
Exactly.
But one question I wanted to ask you is, do you think that as a police officer and policing in general, do you think that there's too much emphasis that the police almost are like the catch-all for like any problem in society? So it's like when you talk about mental health, like are police officers the best people that should be responding to mental health issues? And I'm sure that's a good percentage of calls relate to people having mental health issues or related to that.
Right.
And are we basically saying the police officers have to do the cleanup on everything?
Right.
And maybe funding might be better, that we allow our police officers to just be police officers for the safety, and maybe people, if we're talking about funding or defunding, that we switch and pivot, and maybe a different group of people needs to be the one answering mental health calls. Maybe we have more of I know there's talk about having more social workers and things like that, who can come out in the community and play that role. And maybe we're putting too much emphasis on police officers to kind of serve any and all purpose, and maybe that puts a stress on that, and that also makes things difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think there's some challenges that come with that. One, when you're dealing with a mental health subject, it could go either way. You
might actually still need police there.
Exactly. You might still end up needing an officer because, if they get violent or something like that, now you're dealing with this social worker that may not have the other training that's needed to, subdue that subject. So it's one of those things where it's really slippery. Obviously, no, I don't think police officers are equipped to deal with that for the most part. They have maybe a, hour class, 8-hour class, maybe a 40-hour class, but that's not going to be on a regular basis. So it's one of those things where, they have recently, in the recent years, increased their training when it comes to dealing with mental health and dealing with those subjects. That doesn't mean they're going to be certified and specialists when it comes to dealing with it. And then, like I said before, there's still all those other factors that they got to warrant in. Like, you can't just zero in on this person, especially if you're by yourself.
Right.
You got other factors that surround you. Right. So it's, it could be 8, 9, 10 people in one home. And, now you're trying to deal with this person with mental health problems, but you still got to worry about the other issues that's going on in the home and what's happening. So it's a lot to focus on. So, and you would think, you want to have a dedicated department that have social workers or whomever come out and deal with these problems. It's going to be really tricky because, like I said, these things turn violent. What is going to be their recourse so they can stay safe?
Right.
And the people around them can stay safe.
Right.
So it's almost like you get so far down this rabbit hole to now the social workers carrying a gun and, and other...
Or the police are showing up at these in every capacity anyway.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where if you have these social workers that end up getting all this equipment and they, get the body armor and all that, now you're dealing with a police officer again. So it's one of those things where I do agree that there should be more emphasis on trying to fund these departments. It's not, situations can teeter it's just a matter of a second.
And you don't know when you're going to call, if this is going to be just a more calm situation that just needs an additional external person, or if this is going to be maybe turn into something more violent or destructive or have issues. And so at that point, what do you do? Who do you send first? Police, and then you say, okay, it's not that bad, so we can bring in a social worker and the police can leave, but at that same time, the police are still showing up every single time. Right,
so now you're still responding, so you still need that officer to respond. So it's one of those things where, like I said, I would love to see some funding go that route because there are scenarios where that is more appropriate, especially, and I think I want to lean more as an emphasis on for juveniles, because I think you do need more mental health and you do need more social work for that scenario, because you want to keep juveniles out of the criminal justice system as much as you can. Obviously for those violent acts, that's entirely different, but for those non-violent acts, you really want to have someone that can sit down and talk to them and try to relate and try to figure out a way to, steer them down a better path, because you don't want them to end up in the system in and out, and destroy their lives. So definitely for the youth, I think that is something that should be looked at and should be invested in better, funded better.
Right. All right. Well, I think you've covered a lot about funding and defunding. So where do you stand on that? You think we need to strike a happy balance between
you just
keeping the budget but making sure we're using it in the best manner, or maybe reappropriating some of the funds to be more appropriate to what we need?
Right. Yeah. We need to do that. I think defunding or reappropriating is probably the better word, like I said. But yeah, we need to look into those areas, and not only just policing, but the entire budget
Right.
as well, because it's more waste than just policing.
Right.
And that's something that people have to understand as well. Like, it's not just all. It is a majority because you have so many officers. I think out of the departments, that's probably going to take up a lot when you start thinking about pensions and retirement and benefits and all that, et cetera, et cetera. But we still need to look at it and try to figure out where, because I don't want to cut jobs.
Right.
I don't want to cut jobs. I don't want to cut salaries because these people do a dangerous job. Police officers do a very dangerous job. So you don't want to disincentivize being a police officer.
Right. Well, you
Because
also
it's
don't
already-
want to add more stress to the police that are already out
Right.
there doing it. Is they're already not getting paid or compensated
Right.
that well, and they're already doing extremely stressful. So to cut and say you're going to have even less benefits or you're not going to get paid as much is only going to put more stress in this already very stressful scenario.
And I want to pivot all that before we close this subject, because I do want people to realize something. Most police officers that I know,
Mhm.
they don't work 40-hour work weeks.
Right.
They're working 70, 80, 90 hours a week.
Right.
They supplement their salaries with part-time jobs. And those part-time jobs can pay very well, might I add. But they also have to end up paying taxes and things of that nature, so it kind of balances itself out. But my whole point of this is, that's why I say it's very, very slippery, because if you think about it, you really want to fund them so we can increase their salaries, so we can get them off these part-times, and they can spend more time trying to help out the community, trying to clean up, trying to do more community policing and things of that nature. But that's not happening because they're spending all their time on these part-times. Like, they're taking that 40 hours and then they're going to these part-times for another 30 hours, 20 hours a week.
Mhm.
And what happens is, you end up helping the community because they might be, working a club or working a church. And what I mean by that is they'll either direct traffic or provide some kind of, superficial security, because there's all restrictions in place where they're not going to start being a bouncer at a club or anything like that.
Right.
But they'll still be around and visible. So, and that varies between malls and et cetera, et cetera. So it's one of those things where, they are out there in the community, but they're not doing the things that they need to be doing
Right.
when they're doing those type jobs. You see what I'm saying? Because if you had a safer community, you wouldn't even need that.
Mhm.
So that's why I said I would caution people to say, don't defund, because when you defund, now all you're doing is saying, okay, well, I might be better served to just work these part-times and just be a part-time police officer.
Right.
And that's something that I've seen a lot of more interest in than not, because they'll just get their certification, go get a reserve position,
Mhm.
and then go work these part-times and make way more money on the part-times than they do
Right.
on their full-time job.
Right.
And, you really don't want policing to turn into that,
Mhm.
because if it does turn into that, you're going to have a lot less safer streets as a whole, but you just have safer areas that can afford to pay
Right.
for it. So it's almost like privatizing the police force.
Right.
So that's why I say it's slippery, because in some areas you really need to increase the funding
Mhm.
so you can you make it where police officers don't have to go work these part-times.
Right.
And obviously there are underlying reasons on why they have to end up working all these extra jobs when it comes to housing and things of that nature. But I won't even go down that rabbit hole because
Right.
it's a whole different story. So we can transition now to
Okay.
the next subject.